Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network, and today's topic is doingness. And I don't know that it's a word, but we're going to use it anyway because we can. So, doingness being something that allows us to have a sense of control or a sense of productivity, and we assign our value and personal worth to these things that we do. And what we're going to talk about is moving from this space of doingness or being a human doing into being a human being and what might be available for us in that transition. So it's a topic we've talked about before, but it warrants talking about again and again. Anyway, before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present, and let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding into your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your electrons, all your molecules, and creating this brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together and very softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel the deliciousness of that sensation, the tickling, the tingling, the pressure, the temperature, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Good morning. Welcome, Rosalind. So good to have you here with us this morning. Welcome, everybody who's joining us. We're talking about doingness. And, there's a great sense of security that we can get from doing. It makes me think of a lot of different patterns that folks have to create comfort when things are disrupted. Some people eat, for comfort. Some people ingest other kinds of substances. Some people do stuff. Some people just immerse themselves in doing. And I think culturally we're acclimated to this doing paradigm, that's how we validate ourselves in the world. That's how we show that we have worth. I was in sales for a bunch of years, and in sales, you are only as good as your next sale. It's like, what have you done lately? And this is a foundational way of interacting in our culture that is, I think, deeply problematic on so many levels, and it's a symptom of a deeper issue too, if we look at the whole system. But as I mentioned, I was in sales, and one of the things that I think back on in sales is it was about make so many calls a day, make 10 calls a day. It wasn't about how you were in the context of those calls. It was just make those calls. And the thing that was missing is the understanding of the beingness in the context of those calls. It wasn't really about making the calls. It was about making effective calls, right? And an effective call has to do with the way that you're being, the connection that you're making. That, you know, it may be that their numbers are part of it, but with the focus on doing, what happens is that we lose perspective of the being and the intention that drives the end result. So you could go out and be in a funk and make 10 calls and have no positive effect from that, right? Because you're just going through the motions, versus if you have an intention of connecting and serving and providing a service, then it shifts the whole dynamic of any doing that comes out of that. So Rosalind says, doing related to desire. Are we talking about the choice to do something versus reactive response? I love it, Rosalind. Thank you so much. Looking at patterns underlying the motive. Exactly. So when we look at, a lot of us do the doing because we feel like we have to, or that's what we should do. And we are disconnected from how we are in the process of doing all these things. You know, we just allow ourselves to check out and be robotic, or we get to, or we react with resentment, right? As you're talking about choice to do something versus reactive response. So when we actively choose, and I love that you brought that into the mix here, Rosalind, when we actively choose, then what we're doing is we're shifting our being, right? Because we are creating an alignment, and through that alignment, our whole approach to whatever is going on shifts when we choose to do something. Now, there may be, you know, we have situations where there are things that we get to do. I remember situations where there might be an event that I was required to attend. And a lot of times in the face of that kind of situation, there would be, I would feel a lot of resistance and resentment and grumbling and mumbling, and not be really interested. That's an understatement. Not be in any way aligned to going to this event. And when going into a situation with that kind of resistance and that kind of negativity, it is going to be a negative experience, not only for me, but the people that I encounter, right? So what happens when, instead of going begrudgingly, doing something, whatever it is, begrudgingly, that we have an obligation or responsibility to do, what happens if instead of just doing, we shift our sense of being into a place of choice and or curiosity? Then our whole beingness changes, and then that trickles out to the experience itself, right? So this getting to the essence of things, getting to the essence of ourselves, is a really important thing for how we relate to our lives, how we relate to ourselves, and how we relate to each other. One of the things about the doingness that so many of us resort to is that it's a way for us to disconnect. It's kind of like eating or substances, or, like when we create a checklist, we do our doing, we might be resisting it, we might be grumbling about it or complaining about it. We're not in our power. We're not even present to ourselves in that, right? We're creating an externality that we then are using as a foil against which we get to rebel or push or whatever. And we have so much more power than that, so much more capacity for possibility when we allow ourselves to be present to choice and to aligning ourselves with whatever we're doing, and also to recognize that there is the deeper issue that I alluded to is the issue of self-worth. So we want to feel better about ourselves. So we do a whole bunch of stuff, and then we can feel good about ourselves because we produced something or we accomplished something. And then that's how we value ourselves, versus connecting to our fundamental being, which is already sufficient and whole and complete. So when we are able, and I know that this is probably one of the biggest challenges for most humans I've met, actually, is to, self included, is to come to this place of wholeness and sufficiency that doesn't require us to prove our value, that we are intrinsically worthy just by virtue of nature, just by virtue of the fact that we are here, that we are being, that we are breathing, that we are alive. And then from that space of the assumption of worthiness and wholeness and sufficiency, we have the ability then to give ourselves the freedom to choose all kinds of things that bring us joy and that bring us that are a reflection of our light, that are an expression of our light out of joy, so that the doingness becomes something that we're engaged in. And it's not the doingness that gives us, or the doneness that gives us the satisfaction, but it's the doing in and of itself. So I think when we get engaged in a whole lot of doing, what happens is we're not present to the process, and we focus just on the result. And when we focus just on the result, then there's a deep emptiness and friction that can occur in the process itself. So we can get so focused on what we're trying to accomplish that it's this old trope, the ends justifies the means. But the thing is that it doesn't. The ends do not justify the means. And we have been very focused on the outcomes and measure by the outcomes, which are always, once there's one outcome that's completed, now what? Like you're only good as your next sale, for instance. So what do we, if we're only focused on outcomes, what's happening is we miss life. Life is what happens between here and there. It's not the there. Like life doesn't start when we get there. Rosalind says, question to ask self, is the underlying motive to keep me safe, fear, lack, worth, or loss? so I think that that's a great question, to be able to step back and ask yourself, what am I doing this for? I know I have had encounters with folks who are doing all kinds of things to market their business because that's what they think they should be doing, hating every bit of it, and also not even sure that they want to have a business. So, but that's what you should do, right? Like, I'm going to build an empire because that's what I should do. And it's not about what my heart and soul is calling for. And so the idea, doingness versus beingness is being present to the process of life, like to be present to life, like what's happening here and now as I'm in the process of creating what it is I'm creating, or generating whatever it is I'm generating, what's happening in this space of my life in this moment. It's so many of us. I remember in school, I was thinking about going to graduate school, and then it would be like, well, after graduate school, my life will start, or after I'm finished college, my life will start, or after I'm finished high school, my life will start. And I think, after I have so much money in the bank, that's when my life will start. After I find when I find a life partner, my life will start. When I lose 20 pounds, my life will start. And, like, this is kind of crazy that I know what the notion of delayed gratification is coming to mind. Like, I'm going to suffer through this, and then on the other side of it, it'll be worthwhile. The thing is that that's a way that we give away our lives. And I'm not saying that every moment has to be something joyous, because we have all kinds of life that happens and we get to experience all kinds of emotions and circumstances. But to be saying that, to be devaluing the importance of this moment, to say, well, it'll be better later. I think we get to shift that by choosing what we choose. And we may be choosing to be going through a time that isn't ideally what we dream of, to get to establish things for ourselves in a particular way. We may be choosing challenges, but let's choose it. Let's be aligned with it. And if we can't be aligned with it, maybe we get to figure out something else instead. I think that in choice, we're creating the quality of our lives. We don't have to say, I'm choosing to be miserable now so I can be happy later. That's not the kind of choice I'm talking about. I'm really talking about being aligned with something so that we can be appreciative, grateful, present, engaged in the process. So the shift from doing to being is a shift to presence. It is a shift to awareness. It's a shift to choice. It's a shift to engagement. And I know that so many of us are deeply sensitive, and there's so much input in the world that it can become very overwhelming, and we want to retreat into some kind of space of safety, and you know, sometimes we feel like we need to check out, and I get that. I mean, I definitely have the need to check out periodically because there's such overwhelm, and we can notice when we have that impulse, and we can consciously and deliberately perhaps check out, you know, to deliberately choose rather than to do it unconsciously. And maybe it means immersing ourselves in some kind of doing. Now, this is actually another take on doing, where, for instance, maybe something that we're doing, whoops, sorry about that, guys. Maybe something that we're doing brings us into flow. Good morning, Robin. So good to see you here with us this morning. Welcome, welcome. We're talking about doingness. There are certain things that we can do that can bring us into flow. And for instance, maybe we're painting, or maybe we're knitting, or maybe we're, I mean, meditating, obviously. Maybe we're playing music, doing art, something creative, which actually brings us more deeply into a state of flow, of being, of connection. You know, maybe we're walking in nature. Maybe we're smelling the flowers, literally. You know, there are practices of doing that can deepen our experience of being. And that's a whole different context. But I'm thinking of doobie doobie doo, do be, you know, like this interplay. I think instead of do be, it really should be more be do, you know, from the space of being, we get to do. And yet there are some practices that can support us in that beingness. And so what we're talking about today is shifting a focus from outcome to process. And this is reflective of a greater, bigger, broader concept, you know, where instead of looking at mechanistic parts, we look at a system. Rather than looking at outcomes, we recognize process. It doesn't mean that the outcomes should be disregarded, but we're engaged more in the process as part of the outcome. You know, the process and the experience is itself an outcome, right? So Rawson says, one strategy is to ask why 5 times. For example, why are you going to work? To have money to pay mortgage. Why do you need a house? To be able to be safe. Why? What do you need to be kept safe from? And so on. And then sometimes it's easier to let go rather than spinning in the navigation of the sea of thoughts. I get that, Rosalind, for sure, for sure. So why is an interesting question. And I get what you're saying here is really actually quite important to be looking at what the underlying motivation is for doing the things we're doing. You know, I'm afraid I'll lose my edge, or I'm afraid that my business won't succeed. So I'm doing all this stuff. And it's motivated by fear, for example. And when we're motivated by fear, it might get us to do stuff. But the quality of what we do is going to be very different. And the quality of the experience certainly is going to be very different if we're motivated by fear than if we're motivated by possibility, right? If we're motivated by possibility, the process can be a lot more rewarding, right? And the process is where we spend most of our lives. The outcome is like a finite place where there's, you know, there's an ending that we say, okay, that's done, next. I mean, there's generally not even a heartbeat between that's done and next. And so the ability to be appreciating and enjoying the experience of our lives, where we wish our lives away. So Rosalind says, or ask self. And I think there's a comma there, so there's more coming. But the asking of questions to ourselves is a really powerful thing to source our intentions. And so Rosalind says, or ask self, how would I feel if the thing were already done? Well, so this is an interesting thing, because I've done things that, you know, took a long time, took a lot of effort. And typically after it was done, there was an emptiness in many cases, because the process of the doing was so deeply traumatic, and I brutalized myself in the process. I got the thing done and there was that accomplishment, but there was such a taint on it from the trauma of doing it the way that I did it, without joy, without appreciation, without gratitude, just with driving myself to do something. And there have been other instances where I was able to presence myself to gratitude through the process. And even though it might be grueling at times, and so one of the toughest things I've done, there was a lot of joy and appreciation and feeling of reward in the process, versus something that I had to fight my way through. And so, you know, it's a shame in a way to have come to this point in life to say, wow, all these things, look at how much life I missed because I was just looking at the outcome and not being present to the value of the process itself, like really engaged in being where I was when I was there. And that's what really this conversation is about, is not wishing our lives away, not trying to get through this, you know, whatever this is, but to be embracing it as life also, to be embracing every element of life in every moment. That's it, you know, that's being awake, that's being aware, you know, to be relishing all of it, including the difficult aspects of it, right? But to be being present to the fact that this is it, this moment is life. And And the doingness, when it comes from being in this moment, is a much richer experience and probably has much richer outcomes than if we are to be just focused on the doing and the outcome and getting stuff done. Great, you get stuff done. And what's the quality of life? So that's it for this morning. I so appreciate you joining me for these conversations and musings and deconstructions of our existing paradigms. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. And Rosalind says, what is something I really want and is out of my reach? If I had it, what would I be doing, saying, acting if that outcome is already here? So those are such pertinent keys to manifesting, Rosalind. And if we say that something I really want is out of my reach, maybe we get to reframe that to say, here's something I want, and the fact that I want it means that it's within my reach, and what does that look like, and how would it feel, and what is it that is driving me to desire that outcome? So anyway, good morning, Dido. So glad you were joining us this morning, and it's Friday, so I wish you guys an amazing weekend and of beingness. Get to connect with you and your life and the quality of your life, and hopefully some joy and unexpected pleasures. It's Mother's Day, so to all of you who are mothers or who know mothers or who have mothered other children or animals or other creatures, happy Mother's Day. And so much love to all of you. And I look forward to seeing you here again really soon in the beginning of the week, hopefully. And until next time, lots and lots of love.